Up until now, we've been using the onload event handler on the file reader to figure out when a file has finished loading in order to do any additional work. But the file reader API provides a much lower, more detailed, more granular way of handling the process of reading file contents, and that's what we're going to look at in this movie. So the file reader event handlers provide more detailed control over the read process. Now, we've already used the onload handler. The onload handler signifies that the file reader has finished successfully reading the data. And it's important to note here that that only fires when the read process has been successful. There are other event handlers, though. The onload start event handler fires when the data reading is about to begin. It hasn't started yet, but it's about to. And you can use that event to update any progress indicators or any other pre-reading logic that you need to execute. The onload end event fires when the file reader has finished reading either with or without an error. And that's an important distinction from onload, because onload end will always fire. It will always execute regardless of whether the read process was successful or not, so you can do any post-reading cleanup. The onProgress event is called periodically during the read operation. So as the browser is reading the chunks of data from the file, you can use the onProgress event to update any kind of user interface that you have that tells the user how the read is progressing. The onError handler indicates that something went wrong during the read process, and then finally onAbort is fired when the process of reading the data was interrupted, because there is a way for you to provide a cancel button or whatever UI you want to provide to stop the reader in its tracks. So let's put this into practice and see it in action. So I'm going to go over to the code. Okay, I'm here in the code, and this is my events_start file, and here's the snippets, and I've scrolled down to using file events. So let's take a look at the file first and see what we're going to do here. So I've got a few variables at the top here. I have the file that's going to be read. I have a global variable for the reader because we're going to need to access it from more than one place. And then I have a little flag here that indicates whether or not this is the first time through the progress logic, and we'll see why that's there in a moment. Here's my initialization function, and all of this should look familiar by now. The only thing that's different is that in addition to an event listener for the change handler on the file input, I've got two other listeners here listening for clicks on a start read button and an abort read button. And those are down here. So here are the two buttons I've got. One of them will start the reading process, one of them will cancel the reading process. And let's scroll back up. Now everything else is pretty much the same. This is the event handler that will fire when the user chooses a file, and all we need to do now is add the logic for reading the data. So let's go to the snippets, and the first thing I'm going to do is copy the start read function. Now this is the function that will get called when the user clicks on the start reading button. So I'll paste that in. Now let's take a look at what's going on here. Inside the start read function, which is what gets called when the user clicks start reading, the first thing it does is checks to see if a file has been selected. And if a file has been selected, then we go through the reading process. Otherwise, we show an alert that says, hey, you got to select something first. So we create a new file reader and assign it to our global reader variable. And then I assign some event handlers corresponding to all the event handlers I just talked about. There's load start, load end, etc., all the way down to onAbort. And then I just call the readers read as binary string. Now, I'm not actually going to do anything with the data when it comes back. I'm just going to read the file just so you can see how the event handlers are used. So let's go back to the snippets. Let's copy over the abort read function. This is the function that gets called when the user clicks on the cancel reading button. And we'll paste that in. And basically, it checks to see if the reader global variable is not equal to null. In other words, we've created a reader. And if we have, we call the reader.abort function. And that will stop any read progress right in its tracks. Okay, the only thing left to do now is copy over the various functions we've created to handle the different events. So I'm going to copy all these lines right here, all the way down to file abort. We'll copy those, and we'll paste those in. So let's take a look at each one of these. So the first two, file load start and file load end, are called when the reading process starts and when the reading process ends. And all they do is put out some HTML into our little log area down below that shows that the various events were called. So these correspond to onload start and onload end. The next one is the file load, which corresponds to the onload handler that we've been using up until now. And that does two things. First, it makes sure that the progress counter is updated to 100%, which we'll see in a moment. And it also says, hey, the file reading completed and the onload event handler fired. All right, the next one is the progress event. This will be called over and over again. And it is a function that takes an event argument. And the event argument here is a progress event. And I've included the URL right here in the code for you to look up what progress events are. They're very simple. Basically, they include three fields. The first one is a Boolean called length computable. And this will be true if you can use the data inside the event to calculate how much of the progress has been completed so far. So if this is true, then we can go ahead and compute progress. Otherwise, we can't. And then I check to see if this is the first time through. Now, if this is the first time through our progress event handler, what we're going to do is insert this paragraph right here, and it has an ID on it of prog counter. And so the first time through, we'll insert this, and then we'll update it over and over again down here. See, outside this if statement, we'll calculate the progress by looking at the loaded property of the event, dividing it by the total property, and multiplying that by 100 to get a percentage. And then we'll use the math library to round that to a round number. So each time through, this value right here is going to be updated with how much has been loaded so far. This is going to be the total amount that needs to be loaded. So we'll be able to calculate the percentage. And then since we've inserted this prog counter the first time through, we'll be able to get that in the document and then update it with the file reads current progress. So that function will be called over and over again. Down here, we have our error handler. And you can see that I'm handling a couple of errors here. There's a not found error. There's a not readable error. So if something goes wrong during the read process, then this function will be called and will output a little message saying what the error was. And then finally, there's the file abort function, which will be called when the user clicks the cancel button. So when the abort method gets called, it will stop the reader. The reader will then fire off an on abort message, which is where we output the message here. So it says reading has been aborted. Okay, so now that we've got all that in place, let's save. And as usual, I have to copy this to my web server. And you can go ahead and do the same thing if you want to. And I'm going to switch over to the browser. And this is the UI for this example. I'm going to refresh to make sure I have the most up-to-date version of the code. So down here in this area is where the read progress will be reported. And you can see here's my start reading, here's my cancel reading button. So I'm going to choose a file. Now, the file I'm going to choose for this particular example is one that you don't have in your exercise files folder. And the reason is because it's very, very large. It's about, let's see, you can see it's about 320 megabytes. And if we included this in your exercise files folder, it would be incredibly huge to download from the lynda.com website. So I'm going to do this just for the sake of demonstration, but if you want to do this on your own, you can use any one of the other exercise files I've provided, or if you have a large one that you want to try out, you can try your own large data file. So I'm going to select this file right here, click open, and you can see now that we've selected the file. So I'm going to head and click the start reading. And you can see that the progress counter is updating as the file is being read. So the onload start event fires. Then the progress gets updated. The onload handler fires because everything completed successfully. And then finally, the onload end event, which always fires regardless of whether things are successful or not, that then fired. Okay, let's try something else. Let's try it this time. We're going to do the same file, only this time I'm going to start the reading process and then click the cancel reading button right away. So let's refresh. And I will choose the same file. All right, so now I'm going to click start reading and then click cancel. Okay, so start and cancel. And you can see that it got as far as about 64%, right? The onload start handler fires, then the progress starts, then it says a file read error has occurred. Now, I didn't include a case inside my error handler for the abort case, but I could have. But since I've already got a function that handles the on abort case, I simply use that one instead. And you can see that file reading has been aborted. And then the onload event handler, which always fires, is the last thing to happen. So you can see that using the file reader, you can do it one of two ways. You can use the onload handler, which is the simple way of reading a file, and it fires when everything is done. Or if you want more granular control over your reading process, maybe you're showing the user some UI as the file is loading, or you want to give them the opportunity to cancel the load process, you can use the file reader events.